Assembly Police and hashtag Police Q&A. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions at this morning. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Members Dismore and Duval.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? And can I also ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests and other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality, which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality, whether relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? None? None. Okay, agenda item 3, standing delegation. Can I ask the committee to note the standing delegation agreed to me by the London Assembly plenary meeting on the 6th of June 2019 as set out on the agenda? Noted. Thank you. Item 4, minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meetings of the Police and Crime Committee held on the 23rd of May and the 4th of June 2019 to be signed by me as correct records? Yep. Thank you. List of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed, ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee as listed in the report? Thank you. Can I also ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me and the delegated authority and note the summary of our visit to Brixton Police Station as set out in the report? Okay, before we move to our next item, the substantial item on today's agenda, the question and answer session, Deputy Mayor, I do wish to express the consensus of this committee in respect of the way that the announcement of the departure of the Chief Executive MOPEC, Rebecca Lawrence, has been made. We were not told about this formally, and obviously we wish her well, and congratulations to her, but we are concerned, and we will be writing to you formally. But on behalf of my colleagues, I just want to put this on record, that it would be better to be told about these things formally.
Okay. Apologies for that.
Okay. So let's move on to the question and answer session. If I kick off, the first set of questions is on sexual offences and rape, and it's to you, Deputy Mayor. So one of the Mayor's commitments is to scrutinise the workload of officers involved in violence against women and girls cases. So how is that commitment being fulfilled in terms of those officers working in BCU safeguarding teams? And can you give us an example of action you've taken as a result of your scrutiny of these workloads?
So in terms of oversight and scrutiny of the work of the Metropolitan Police around violence against women and girls, I hold regular meetings with Mark Simmons, but we also hold regular oversight board meetings on a quarterly basis where we go through, you will have seen the performance report, there is a violence against women and girls a section of the performance report, and we have regular discussions around sanction detection rates, for example, discussions with the Commissioner around her concerns, which she voiced very publicly last week around overall sanction detection rates, but in particular sanction detection rates around domestic abuse. Part of that oversight also looks not just around overall London figures, but looking at consistency across BCUs, looking at where there are inconsistencies or good performance or not so good performance across BCUs. I have also, in terms of sexual offences and safeguarding, I have also visited 2 BCUs to discuss with them the changes around the safeguarding and to discuss with them workload, issues around digital disclosure, how the changes are landing, and that is part of ensuring that the strategic oversight is married up with that understanding of what is happening on the front line as well, by making sure that I am there and I have discussed and engaged with frontline officers who are experiencing and are having to deliver the changes around, particularly around the changes to the basic command units.
Okay, I may come back to you later. But Assistant Commissioner Simmons, can I ask you that since the introduction of the BCUs, officers dealing with rape and sexual offences have higher workloads and long periods of overtime. Is this something which is consistent across all the BCSUs? And if so, how is it being monitored and addressed? You may also know that we went to see the BCU at Brixton a couple of weeks ago, so we had first-hand experience of what officers are going through on the front line.
So firstly, it's not the case that officers investigating rape have higher workloads in terms of rape investigations than they did beforehand. The average number of investigations per officer at the moment is something like 8.5 across the whole of London. There's 8.5, sounds a silly number when you're talking about an offence like rape, I understand, but there is a variation across different BCUs between broadly about 12 to about 6 as an average. The position in terms of the number of rape investigations per officer is favourable compared to what it was before the BCUs. And it's also the case that with the pressures that we were under in terms of the central setup before the BCU setup, that there were a number of those rape investigations which, not out of kind of choice from our point of view, but where the investigations were led by police constables under the supervision of detectives rather than by detectives themselves. So the workload is broadly in a range that fits with kind of what we planned. And we are moving to the point where it's fully trained, qualified detectives who are leading all those investigations. So that's the position we're in at the moment. As you know, I'm sure the position in terms of staffing, the increase in demand for the central Sapphire part of SCO 17, as it was known, had to be constantly bolstered by attachments from boroughs as it was then in order to manage the workload at that time. And of course many of those attachments, as I commented on now, were PCs, as opposed to the position we have now where the investigators for those for rape and the other serious crimes in safeguarding are detectives.
Can I actually just pick up from what you were just saying? You just talked about rape. The question from the chair was rape and all other sexual offences, and the workload has gone up.
So sexual offences as a whole were not dealt with by SCO 17 before, so drawing a direct comparison is difficult to do. And of course the nature of sexual offences there's a wide variation in terms of the amount of investigative work that goes into some sexual offences compared to others. So, for example, an indecent exposure has a very different level of investigation and expertise and so on required than a rape, to state the obvious. Similarly, there's the offences that we see on buses and so on, of indecent touching and so on, then are also in that bracket. But the workload in terms of rape offences is the easiest one to make a direct comparison about, because that was what the Sapphire officers investigated, rape and serious sexual offences by that definition, as opposed to all sexual offences, recognising that as I say, the nature of the investigations do vary from the offences that are not classified in formal terms as the serious sexual offences.
From the detectives we spoke to, it was quite clear that their workload had gone up because they were having to go and deal with DV cases coming in that were urgent. So they were having to put aside some of their work on these serious rape cases to go and deal with DV and the volume of work coming through. So actually their workload had gone up hugely and they were having to work considerable overtime as well. So I think you're painting a rosier picture than what we found on the ground.
So I'm not certainly paint a rosy picture. There's a huge amount of pressure in this area of work. Safeguarding is highly pressurised. We know, for all the reasons that are well rehearsed here, around the increase we've had in demand over recent years. Again, that's victims coming forward and telling us about their experiences. So we know we've had that huge pressure in terms of demand that cuts across from from rape and serious sexual offences into domestic abuse as well, and we know there is a significant overlap in that in between people who suffer both sexual violence and domestic violence. And a significant proportion of the rapes that were reported to us, one of the benefits of bringing investigators together, also had elements of other elements of domestic violence, as well as issues of child protection, where that's occurred in a family or within a relationship. It is true, of course, that bringing the dedicated rape investigators and child abuse investigators into the local environment where they are working alongside domestic abuse investigators, part of the drive for that, given the increase in demand and pressure and the importance of this work, is to give us the flexibility to respond to what we're presented with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis in the best way we can. Overall, there is more people, I was going to say more resource, but that is people, officers working in that arena of safeguarding, some 300 more than there were under the previous system with the borough domestic abuse units and CSUs and the central rape and child abuse investigators. Do I paint a rosy picture? No, I wouldn't seek to paint a rosy picture about the investigation of serious sexual offences, sexual violence and the other safeguarding issues. It's a great challenge for us.
Mm. And the additional 300 posts you say have been created, are they all filled, or is that just the posts, but actually you're carrying a lot of vacancies?
So they're not all filled. There's a, you know, in the scale of the Met, there's movement in and out of posts across the whole of London. It makes it difficult to say exactly how many at any point in time, but we do prioritise the filling of safeguarding posts. Albeit that there's pressures then against the more, the street violence type work as well, which requires a lot of the same skills and so on. But we do prioritise the safeguarding posts as best we can. You will be well aware, I think, again, of some of the pressures around our detective recruitment position. And, of course, detective skills are what we need for the serious offences in safeguarding, as well as in the investigation of the serious violence incidents. So there is pressure around that, although we have a good trajectory in terms of what over the coming months. So yes, there's pressure in all those in that arena. The vacancies we keep to as small a number as possible, but there is a reality about the numbers on the BCUs as we move towards the 31,000 and how that enables us then to manage the pipeline through into detectives and into some of the more serious offending investigations.
I wonder whether we could have in writing from you after this what the current vacancy is, and also to understand the number of officers in that unit who are on maternity leave and long-term sick, so we can get a real picture of the numbers you've got working in this field. Could I just pick up before I move into what I wanted to ask about, just from the Deputy Mayor, you said you'd visited a couple of BCUs. Could you tell us which ones you visited and what you found talking to officers working in safeguarding?
So I visited Central North most recently in February, and then also I visited East Area a while back when it was a pathfinder in terms of safeguarding. I also heard issues being raised about workload, pressure, issues around disclosure, around disclosure and difficulties around some of the difficulties around downloading the amount of digital evidence that there is to be downloaded. But I did genuinely also see, particularly when I visited Central North, a real grip in terms of the safeguarding procedures, the data that was available, the understanding of the supervisors and those in managing the teams, an understanding of caseload, workload, how many cases officers are carrying, sometimes the inconsistency in terms of officers carrying different levels of caseload. So a real grip and understanding of that. And I don't at all take away from the fact that workload and pressure is really severe in safeguarding, but as Mark Simmons has already said, extra officers have gone in. Some of this is really about the increase in reporting, good that is, but that does mean there's an increase in complexity, increase in workload and pressure, but also the fact that police officer numbers and detective numbers, we've had massive constraints on that, and that does have an effect. The BCU, the thing about, I think the premise of your question that this is a result of the BCU changes, I wouldn't agree with. I think it's a result of increase in demand and a decrease in officer numbers and a real pressure on detective numbers. Something that HMIC said in 2016 on the child protection, when we did the first child protection report, that actually lack of detectives is a real issue around the volume of detectives. It's a national problem, and as well as a London problem. That is a real and problematic issue that the Met is trying to address at the moment.
Okay, you've touched on digital. In your MOPAC's latest annual report, you report on significant investment being made into digital forensic kiosks to enable recovery of data from mobile devices. Can you update us on what investment has gone into new technology to help those safeguarding teams on the front line able to retrieve that digital forensic evidence in order to progress cases?
So there has been an investment in nearly 86 standalone kiosks for BCUs in London, but that doesn't mean that the problem is not still there. There is still an issue around backlog and disclosure in digital evidence, and there's also been an investment in training, I think it's 3,000 officers, in the use of those kiosks and the use and how to download digital evidence. So there is, there's been an absolute understanding of the problem. There is the rollout of the kiosks, but we are still not there in terms of the volume of digital evidence. And that, as I said, it's not just about London. That is just the number of devices that individuals have. If I think about my household.
Yeah, no, I understand. But you said 86 kiosks. Are they all operational?
I'm not entirely sure whether they're all operational yet, but they will be being rolled out at the moment.
But perhaps
So
you can come back to that. That is a really big issue. And
yeah, it is.
And when we visited Brixton to talk to the officers there, we heard that there are not enough officers trained in using the digital forensics machine at the station. In fact, it was just one poor detective who was able to download there and then mobile devices. So he was being taken away from doing the work on the cases he had to deal with because he was the only person who could download immediately. And they mentioned they were going to be a pilot there. So it sounds to me like it's far further behind in terms of rolling out the technology and training. So I'm wondering, when can we make sure that we have got this increased capacity across the BCUs to make sure we're not relying on one poor officer to deal with this when it's increasingly important we get digital evidence?
If I can just help on the pilot. So the pilot refers to the next generation of kiosks we start to test this month with a view to increasing the overall, both what the kiosks can do and the number of them. So the pilot doesn't refer to the 86 kiosks that are in place. That's for the next iteration, recognising, as you've said, the demand grows, the backlog is still there, albeit reduced over the last 12 months, and it's going to be a continuing demand, a continuing pressure. And of course, in the training, we are pushing ahead with this training. Again, members will be aware there is a huge challenge around the overall pressure on training. We're trying to train all the officers in safeguarding on all the issues to do with safeguarding, as well as the technical issues to do with digital downloads. And we have a huge programme around all that. So we are trying to absolutely recognise the challenge. I hear that all the time, of course, when I go around the boroughs and BCUs. And we are pushing ahead as much as we can on getting people through that training and increasing both what the kit can do, the kiosks can do, and the number of them available to officers.
So when do you expect the next generation, the new technology you're talking about, to be fully operational across all the BCUs with enough officers trained to use it? What's your timescale?
So I can't off the top of my head, I'm afraid, give you a timescale around the next generation. I know the test starts this month, and I guess we have to make sure that see the results of the test. So I'll have to, with apologies, I'll have to come back to you outside with the timeline that you've asked for there. The training, we continue with the training, and that's a constant programme. And the demand for that is huge, as you say. So that's a significant programme over time. Again, and I can give you more specifics on the timeline outside.
Will this next generation of the technology and the training address the issue flagged in the HMI report on child protection in March, which said there's incompatibility of MPS's IT systems, the force can't use all the functions and capability of things like the child abuse image database and so on? Will this rollout address those concerns that were picked up around digital evidence in that?
So I don't think it's specific. I'd need to look at check the detail of it. I don't think it specifically addresses that. As there's issues around which we are addressing through our IT program around systems.
So that is a separate
investment
in digital capability, then, is it?
So there's various investments we're making in our digital capability around the transfer of evidence, for example, around as well as around the downloading of the evidence in the first place. But for more detail on exactly what all that does, I'd need to come back to you outside on that.
Okay, thank you. We also picked up, so you've got the immediate sort of download of data from devices to be able to, I guess, look at what's there to help with charging decisions and so on. But we also heard that there is a 6 to 9 month backlog for digital evidence sent off to your forensic labs. And it goes off to the labs, particularly when full downloads of data are needed, or if you need to retrieve deleted messages and so on, to get that extracted, and you need your specialist to do that. Have you got enough capacity there? Is there a way that you're looking to increase the investment to make sure you can speed that turnaround up? Because we heard So in Lambeth and Southwark, there are 180 live rape cases. 140 are stuck in the system, the bulk of which were because they were waiting for information from the forensic labs.
So I don't have those specific figures that you've been quoted from Lambeth, but so are we trying to make sure that both in terms of rape investigation, serious sexual offence investigation, and all the other investigations in which digital evidence is important, are we trying to address the issues around the backlog that exists? Yes, we are. In terms of investment, then, as members will be very clearly aware, we are investing on a whole range of things that are designed to help move us forward in terms of the changing context around crime and the demands we face at the moment. But you know, so yes, we have a programme around the digital work, around the where we prioritise in terms of the investigative activity, but the scale of the challenge around digital evidence, both in rape investigations and in other cases, is such that this is it's a constant challenge for us at the moment as how we keep pace with or catch up with the developments that have been in the expectations, the available evidence, the expectations of what we do with that, and how, you know, and the requirement for us to look at that, and how we manage the skills and the equipment across the Met. That's a continuing pressure at the time being, albeit we're making progress in some aspects of it. So some of the waiting times, as I say, have reduced over the last 12 months. But I'm not pretend this is not a major challenge for us.
Are you specifically looking to increase the capacity at the Met's forensics lab for data extraction?
So we've got a programme of work within. So I don't know whether this answers your question directly, and forgive me if I can't. But we have a programme within the lab to make sure we are effectively prioritising which work goes in there. That we are trying to make sure we get as quick a turnaround as possible on those cases we prioritise. Clearly what we want to do is get in the position where we have the greatest capacity possible, hence the investment in kiosks for the tier 1 kind of digital evidence gathering. So yes, we have a programme within forensics to try and address as best as possible the huge demands that we are facing currently on both the developing technology and our ability to do it in a timely fashion.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, are you looking at whether you need to invest more into this area to increase the capacity? It's all right prioritising, and I understand you get a case in that's suddenly incredibly high profile, really important, that will go to the top. But you have got people who've been raped waiting 6 to 9 months for them to decide whether they've got enough evidence to take this to court. You know, these people's lives are almost on hold. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering whether you're looking at that capacity at the lab.
Yes, absolutely, and it's a discussion that I have had at the investment advisory meetings that I chair every month of the Metropolitan Police in terms of investment and looking at actually the capacity of forensics and the fact, I completely agree with you, the fact that rape victims, and this is one part of the problem with victims getting justice around forensic digital evidence. There's much else that needs improving as well, but it's an absolute conversation, discussion that we're having and have had around not just about prioritisation, about, you know, extra capacity, what is needed to speed up the forensic capability and capacity for this type of digital evidence, as well as other forensics as well. I would also say that there has been massive pressure on for the forensic service for the Metropolitan Police. You know, Grenfell still has a huge effect on capacity and investigative capacity, and that, you know, that is still ongoing. And I know it feels like it shouldn't be still having that effect, but it does, and that is on digital capacity as well. There is massive pressure in this area, but it doesn't take away from the fact that absolutely this digital forensic evidence for rape victims is a real issue that needs sorting and, you know, progressing much more quickly.
We might expect a growth bid in the budget for the next year to
invest in this. The budget did have
this.
some extra money for forensic capacity within it, and that is the discussions that we've been having around what that should be spent on and how that should be prioritised.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Pete, thank you. Yes, I just got a question for you, Assistant Commissioner. Carrying on from Caroline. Now, we went to Brixton, as she said, and they were very impressive people, team there. But one thing that emerged is that with the this terrible problem of having to download phones and all of that, so one of the things that emerged was that keywords can't be used even because there's too much information that they, you can't just go to keyword. And they happened to mention, somebody mentioned that often sort of street slang and things that's used for sexual offences changes a lot. And I just wondered, procedurally, how do you get that intelligent? How do you keep, as it were, abreast? Because there were words that were now used which I did not know, and I think most people wouldn't.
Sure. So we rely on so we do a lot of work through the safeguarding teams in each of the BCUs to bring together the learning, the professional development for the staff who work in there. So you use the word intelligence. A lot of what drives the changes in language, changes in what investigators find that informs our approach comes from the work we do with them. I'm talking to this afternoon to a large group of safeguarding investigators from across London at a seminar that's bringing them together to look at how we can support, people like me can support them in the things they are finding difficult from day to day. So they are going to be the first people who come across different language, different behaviours, different things that inform investigative practice, and it's how we manage the professional development for those officers, and then feed that informally into training and into some of the technical responses that's clearly really important.
So it's something that sort of is very much at the top of your mind, as it were.
So this is in this arena, yes. You could equally talk about some of the broader things that happen in gang activity, where we need to, that are some of the similar issues around digital technology and what that tells us. Then yes, the language people use changes, and it is our frontline officers who are going to be the first to kind of to experience that, to learn that, and to be able to inform how we develop the practice.
But I suppose the more canny people will actually purposely change, won't they, language?
Yes, in some circumstances. Yes, in some circumstances, that's true.
Thank you.
Okay, just to round off this section, Deputy Mayor, can I ask you about victim support? And in particular, the Mayor has committed himself to increasing the number of victims of rape and serious sexual assault who are referred to havens. What are the latest referral figures?
I don't have the latest referral figures in front of me, I'm afraid, but in terms of the money that's been invested, there is the £44 million, which was overall when we published the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and then the Mayor in the budget announced the extra £15 million, which was to open up the waiting lists to the havens and to the rape crisis centres. That has now been operationalised, if you like. The money is going to them, and the waiting list. And not to say that women aren't waiting for these really vital services, but at least the havens and the rape crisis centres have been able to reopen their services to women, and that's part of the £15 million has enabled that to happen.
If you could perhaps send us the figures when you get them.
Yeah, I'm sure we can let you have figures in terms of the numbers that are going to.
Yeah, you talked about the 15 million investment, but
I mean, if the figure that I have in front of me is that more than 3,000 women received support through the London Rape Crisis Centres last year. I'm not sure what figures you're after in terms of referrals, but those are the women that are receiving support last year.
Right, so the figures that you said, can you repeat that again? What number was it?
3,000 women received support through the London Rape Crisis Centres last year, and the extra investment will allow more women to receive that support, as well as get access to independent sexual violence advisors, which will be across Pan London to enable them to support them through the criminal justice system. We've just been discussing that in terms of digital evidence, but there is actually, from the Victims Commissioner's review of Victims Code of Practice, we know that women in particular are having a real issue around advocacy and support services to enable them to maintain their journey through the criminal justice system.
Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the subject of the rape crisis centres, you'll recall that there used to be only one, which is the one in Croydon, now called the South London Rape Crisis Centre. I think we're going to be speaking to them soon. And the previous Mayor, to his credit, visited and quadrupled the number of rape crisis centres across London, which I think to his credit. And we're talking about investment, we're talking about the increase in the numbers and the workload. Is there any opportunity or any inclination to look at extending even further the capacities of those rape crisis centres, or indeed increasing the numbers of?
So we are, the £15 million of additional investment has already, a section of that has already gone out. The £1 million of additional funding has been actually fast-tracked to the rape support services. And I do give credit to the previous administration. I remember the top slice from the London Crime Prevention Fund to allow those rape crisis centres to get up and running, and that was the right decision. I've too have visited the South London Rape Crisis Centre, and they are doing fantastic work for women. And the having also now spoken to, and in terms of getting this money and the decisions around what the best way to spend that money, £15 million, is to do with the VOG sector. They are under huge pressure because of the demand.
Yes.
This money will help that, but it will not deal with all the demand that is in the system at the moment, all those women that need support through rape crisis centres. So we are looking at additional investment through the £15 million, and how that there's nearly £7 million that's being set aside to manage that increase in demand. That's a longer term commissioning service that we are hoping to have completed by the autumn to enable there to be an increase in service. I don't think it will result in another rape crisis centre, but it should result in an increase in support services.
Okay, thank you.
Before we move to the next set of questions, can I welcome visitors from Richmond Magistrates Court? So our next set of questions is on facial recognition technology. Assemblyman Barry.
Thank you very much. So, yes, quite a lot of questions about this. First of all, to Mark, we scheduled these Q&As in the anticipation that the independent evaluation of the 10 trials that have been carried out of live facial recognition might be published. We were expecting it very soon. It hasn't been yet. So when will that be published? And can you give us any kind of rundown now of its broad conclusions?
So in answer to the first question, my understanding is it's due to be released imminently, possibly even later on today.
That would be amazing timing, considering we've had this on the agenda for a while, for us not to be able to interrogate its conclusions today.
It is an independent evaluation, so it's not in our control, the timing of that. But
as I understood it, the last time we checked in with the researchers themselves, they'd sent you the results and they were allowing you right to reply in any kind of sign-off process on them first. So you were in control of the timing, as far as I can tell.
No, as is standard for this sort of work, we were given opportunity to check, for accuracy and so on. I don't think that's I don't know. I'm not close enough to that particular process, and I haven't read the report, so I don't know the answer to your second question. I'm not in a position to say what we're expecting to hear later on today. But the process of us our kind of factual checking, if you like, or commentary on the report is not, in my understanding, in my knowledge, not been an issue in the timing.
I would sorry, I'm going off topic now, but I'd be astounded if you published that hours after a meeting of the Police and Crime Committee, which is the main scrutiny body for the MAT. That would feel very wrong to me.
Okay, I understand the point, but my understanding is that the publication of the report is a decision by the authors of the report, and it is an independent report. It is not a decision for us. It's my understanding of the position.
Okay. Alongside that, the MAT is carrying out a technical evaluation report of its own.
Yep.
I believe that's being published alongside the research. Is that correct? Is that also later today?
No, I don't. Not again. As far as I'm aware, that's not happening today. No.
Will you be publishing the technical evaluation report?
In due course, yes. When it's completed. There's a matter of great public interest. We know in that facial recognition, we want to be transparent and open about what we're doing. This isn't a secret. There's no secrets about what we're trying to achieve or what we're trying to do or the work, the tests we're doing and so on. And we're very open to the input we've had from both our own internal evaluation and from other people like the ethics panel and their work on it. And we'll be obviously looking at the report from Essex. So there's nothing secret in what we're doing on the facial recognition.
Okay, it would make sense to publish those two documents together if they both are ready.
So I wasn't aware until last night that the Essex report was going to be published today. As I say that, and my understanding is that's neither were colleagues, but I can't be absolutely sure of that. So we don't, as I've said, we don't have control over the timing of the publication of the Essex report, and so I'm not sure that we would, fact that we had short notice around when the actual publication date's going to be. I don't think we're in a position to publish our independent evaluation yet, our technical evaluation yet, but when we can, we will.
In terms of broad conclusions, obviously you'll have seen the report from Essex University. There was a presentation a few weeks ago of some broad conclusions. Can you tell us what the main lessons you've learned from the trials? I noticed that some of the outstanding issues are accuracy, bias, the issue of making sure people are informed, so there's consent for its use, issues with the ability to withhold consent from being scanned. Are you able to talk about any of those issues and what you've learned?
So as I say, the Essex report is, so I wasn't at the presentation. I know that the discussions on emerging findings have gone along, but I haven't read the final report, so I'm not in a position to comment on that, I'm afraid, in detail. I know there's been obviously things that we've discovered as we've gone along, things we've been working on, and we'll see how that comes out in terms of recommendations and findings and where we go with that. We've stopped current work on facial recognition in terms of active operational use of it, so we can take stock of where we are, recognising, as I say, this is there's a huge public interest in this, as well as obviously an operational interest from our point of view. But we'll see what the recommendations from the Essex report are. In my understanding later today, and we'll be very keen to learn the lessons from that.
Other issues that we've raised in this committee, slightly outside of the remit of the trials, is what the Met is doing in terms of managing its watch list that it might use for facial recognition, including which data sources it might be using. We've asked, for example, whether custody images from recent climate change protests were being added to watch lists. There's also some concern that photographs being taken by forward intelligence officers of demonstrations, including children, might be used to scan and put on a watch list that way as well, even without people being put in custody. What can you tell us about controls on the watch list, and is this being updated even though you're not deploying the technology?
So I'm not aware of the issues that the concerns that you've just described.
We've raised it with the Commissioner here, and we were promised some more information. I don't doubt that for a moment. I don't know the direct answer to that. It doesn't sound. I don't know what the Commissioner's answer was, but I would imagine that it was not. It was that we don't use those sources, and we haven't used those in the watch list, and that's my understanding. But I'd say I don't have the detail of exactly what's in the watch lists. Watch lists, you can put together a watch list based on various data sets, depending what the operational use you are putting a piece of technology to, whether it's ANPR, for example, to use another example, where you do put watch lists onto ANPR, as we do in other systems, as for this, and watch lists can be created depending what is the operational purpose we're seeking to achieve, what's the legal framework for that in terms of proportionality and so on. And what the technical capability of a system is to accommodate what size of watch list. The principal test purpose of the test that we have been doing was around the technical capability of the system. That's been the focus, as to less, I suppose, what is on the watch list as to whoever is on a watch list, and we know the mandate is most significant for serious violence and counter-terrorism. Whatever is on there, then does the technology support the operational objectives that we're trying to achieve as part of the debate around proportionality and the ability to operationalise the technology. Okay, can I ask just three more yes/no questions that you may not have the answer to? Will it be used at Notting Hill Carnival this year? Can you give us reassurance one way or the other?
There are no plans to use it at Notting Hill Carnival that I'm aware of this year, but I probably ought to check that for certain, as I'm not involved in the direct planning of Carnival.
If you can confirm that. Last year we were told definitely not at around this time of year.
That's my understanding.
There's also been reports of Manchester Police teaming up with Trafford Shopping Centre and using facial recognition technology off their CCTV system. We are concerned about this and just wondered if there was any collaboration going on between private holders of CCTV and the police in terms of using facial recognition.
What's this we?
In London.
So I'm not aware of the Manchester work personally. I'm not aware of, again, I will qualify this with, I will probably need to check to make sure because it's a big organisation, but I'm not aware of any work other than the work that's been described in the test here that we're doing, that we have been doing outside of that, but I would need to just check that.
Yeah. I should probably clarify also that we is me in this context. Thank you.
Sorry,
Chair.
It's not us.
More than one of us here is concerned. Finally, on the yes or no questions. There's been reports from a company called Wireless TV who are seemingly trying to market the use of facial recognition integrated into body-worn cameras. These are different body-worn cameras than the police use. Nevertheless, they're floating that idea. Have you been in any discussions with that company in the Met?
I'm completely unaware of that, of the company and what you describe. So
would you be able to find out if there's any discussions taking place?
To my knowledge, no. I know there's been, there's lots of work we're doing on body-worn video as well. I've not come across it. I'm not aware of any work that links that with facial recognition directly at all. I think, from our point of view, very clearly, we want to act in accordance with the law, in accordance with the the framework in which that determines proportionality and so on. But as we've talked about in terms of technology in another context just earlier, we also want to be alive to any opportunities there are to protect the safety of Londoners through the use of technology. There's work we're doing on body-worn video, how we can enhance that in terms of public confidence, as well as the other things body-worn videos serve. And our work on facial recognition has been absolutely focused around: is this an operational technology that will offer us opportunities to protect London to in an increased way than we can now?
Well, those were quite specific questions relating to, like you've just said, developing ideas for future use if you get the legal go ahead. And the question was really, are you exploring those rather than are you going to use them imminently? If you could get back to us.
My answer was that I've not heard of that particular company that you mentioned, and I'm not aware of any exploration of that. I was making the broader point, so I don't want to mislead, is we are keen to exploit any technical opportunities that are proportionate, lawful, etc., that help us protect London. I
mean, they got a story in the Evening Standard. It's hard to imagine they haven't tried to get a meeting with the police, but if you could update us, that would be really useful. I did want to ask the Deputy Mayor some questions as well. You and the Mayor have commissioned, set up the London Policing Ethics Panel and asked them to look at this, and they have reported at the end of May on their conclusions, and they've set 5 conditions for whether ethical conditions these are, about how it could be deployed. And I just wanted to ask you what you thought of those conclusions and those conditions, and what else needs to happen before any further use is made of the technology in operations here.
So the ethics panel chaired by Suzanne Hale is a joint ethics panel between ourselves and the Metropolitan Police. So it's not, we said the Mayor set it up with the Commissioner, and I think it's really important and a really good thing that we do have an ethics panel. And yes, one of the pieces of work, really good piece of work that they've undertaken this year is to look at the ethical framework and the ethics around the use of live facial recognition. When they've published 2 reports, an interim report and the final report with the 5 recommendations, we've been really clear that there should be no further use of any of the technology until the 5 recommendations have been addressed. And that does also include a review of the 2 reports that you've referred to today from Essex, as well as the technical evaluation. And I know that will happen. We've had conversations about that. One of the recommendations was to have robust oversight, and that's certainly something that we'll be making sure does happen. But as I said, and going back to your question about Notting Hill and the body-worn video, there will be no further use of live facial recognition until those recommendations have been addressed. And that's something that we have as an agreement between ourselves and the Metropolitan Police.
Thank you very much for that. Obviously, this is the ethics panel, and there is more to this, i.e. there are legal issues as well. We've had 2 commissioners, government commissioners, the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, Tony Porter, the Biometrics Commissioner, Paul Wild, who've both said very critical things about facial recognition and the fact that there is no current legal basis for this. Will you also say that there will not be any further use of facial recognition until there's a legal basis in line with what those commissioners have recommended?
So one of the recommendations and one of the key things coming out of the report, the ethics panel report, was the need for a national framework and national regulation and a national legal framework, and we are lobbying very hard on that because we are, the police are in the position where they rightly want to use new technology to help keep the community safe. And I think, one of the things coming out of the ethics panel report was a really interesting poll of Londoners around what would be appropriate use of live facial recognition and the scale. There was much more backing from the public around much more serious offences around the use of live facial recognition, and then going down the scale, less agreement to the use of live facial recognition for the less serious offences. So yes, I mean, we are lobbying really hard, and I think it's absolutely, the government need to step into this space. We have the judicial review of South Wales Police. I understand it's likely to come to a decision over the summer, although I don't know when that is. That will also be an important moment in the use of this technology. So we do need to make sure that that regulation, the framework is in place to enable the police to use technology when it's ethically right to do so to keep our communities safe.
Okay, thank you very much. The Commissioner herself, the Commissioner of Police herself, has said that it isn't for the police to decide where the slider should sit on the balance between security and privacy. So I think she is also keen to wait for, but I can't speak for her because she's not here today, but it seems to me that what you've said to us is you, with the powers that you have, will prevent its use until we've got a legal basis and those ethical conditions are met.
We were really clear when the ethics panel published its recommendations that that we expect, and the use of live facial recognition will not take place again until the recommendations have been addressed.
Okay, thank you. And are you keeping oversight of ways in which the police might be doing work in the background, i.e. not deploying things but compiling watch lists, using facial recognition technology on images that might already exist and things like that are not live facial recognition but are nevertheless things that might be of concern legally and ethically towards the use of images of people and using facial recognition software on that?
So the oversight that we have in terms of, some of your questions around different organisations, different businesses coming to the Met, I obviously don't have a sight of all the different conversations that happen, all the different approaches from businesses around use of whatever technology is coming in. It will come to me when there's a decision, and rightly, because the Metropolitan Police is such a huge organisation, it will come to me when a decision is there to be taken around an investment decision around actually purchasing or procuring the investment. But yeah, we do, of course, there's oversight in terms of ensuring, and the audit panel will also have oversight in ensuring that there are the proper frameworks, the proper risks and the proper accountabilities in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia Alba.
Well, first of all, Deputy Mayor, can I say how much we support the line that you're taking on this one? Our view is that so long as this is a legal process, we take the view that people got nothing to hide, got nothing to fear from this technology. But specifically, I'd like to ask Mr. Simmons whether or not it's true that in the experiments that you have had and the trials of this, leaflets were dished out saying we have these facial recognition techniques in place. Did such a thing happen? Well, if I was a criminal and my face was known and I'd see the notice, I wouldn't come in and therefore I wouldn't be recognised. Isn't it a sort of fairly self-defeating thing? And maybe that has contributed to the high failure rate that there has been in the experiments.
I absolutely take the point about forewarning when if there comes a point where we're using the technology in order, as opposed to testing it, we're using it in operational context, then clearly we make decisions around tactically how we do that in order to get the maximum impact from it. But this was a test. We wanted it to be transparent around that. And so we gave the information out to people about what we were doing. We thought that was important, given the current position around the newness of the technology and the public interest.
Yes. I naturally understand that point, but since I think the principal thing that the ethics panel say that there has to be confidence in the system, you were contributing in your experiment to there being a lack of confidence.
There's a balance, isn't it? It's a balance. We were seeking to test the technical, so I understand the point absolutely. That may have influenced the number of identifications that came from the equipment. That's an unknown, of course, but we have a balance between testing the operational ability of it, as I said just now, and not wanting to be transparent, not wanting to the public to feel, or anyone to feel, that we're trying to do things sort of in a hidden way.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes. Just perhaps finally on this, I'm not sure, but for the sake of balance, and this is also probably sort of yes/no question answer, which we do like, and notwithstanding all the proper checks and balances and legal frameworks, independent investigations, would you agree that facial recognition technology has the capacity and potential to make Londoners considerably safer?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, but it does need to be done in an ethical and balanced way, and that's really important.
I did preface, in fairness to myself,
No, you did.
I did preface my question with that.
You did, but I do think it's important to, these yes/no questions are interesting, but it is important to actually, these are complicated and complex issues.
This has been exercised at length. I just wanted that simple yes/no. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So moving on to the next set of questions on crime levels. Assemblymember Alba to lead off.
Yes. These are the questions I've been tasked to give you, Mr. Simmons. What's your assessment of current crime levels in London?
I'm never happy, I'm never content with crime levels in London, and there are a significant number of challenges for us at the moment in terms of a range of different crimes. So we take a number of different perspectives on this. When we look at the national comparison, particularly in other metropolitan forces, that's one of the things we look at to form an assessment of whether we are, of how we look against a national benchmark. But of course, at heart, the main thing we want to do is to reduce crime as much as we can for Londoners and in London. At the moment, we've had there's been huge concern, still remains huge concern about levels of violence. That is still too high, albeit we feel making some progress. But then we look at the events of the last couple of weekends, and we absolutely understand that we can't be complacent around that. On burglary, we've got something like a 2% rise in burglary at the moment in the last year. That's lower than certainly many other parts of the UK, but not complacent around that, and clearly we have work in hand to try and stem the position on burglary and to address that. The area that linked with the issues around violence that clearly cause us concern, but again which we're working on very intensively at the moment, is the position around robbery in certain parts of London. And again, lots of work going on in those locations to address that. So. There's never a level of crime where we're going to say it's okay. On the violence stuff, the huge amount of work still to do on violence, both by us and by the other parties that have a role to play in reducing violence, is still enormous. And when I talk about the progress we're making, I absolutely don't want to give the impression that's complacent in the face of some of the horrendous tragedies, including the one from the news from last night that we've seen over recent weeks and months. So lots of work going on, lots of work to address both the acquisitive and the violent crime challenges for us, and clearly within that some significant decisions around prioritisation.
Yes, I don't think anybody would say that the MPS is complacent about crime levels, because there is nothing to be complacent about. But you've only referred to serious and violent crime. Isn't it likely that the amount of crime which doesn't fall into those categories not being reported is rising, i.e. The fact that there are no prosecutions and police are unwilling to take action over a huge range of crimes, for example, shoplifting, housebreaking where there has been, where there's no evidence, no physical evidence there. when the public believe that the police are not going to take any action, they're therefore not going to report an offence having taken place, doesn't that in fact flatter the crime levels?
I don't think so. So clearly we're conscious of the kind of potential issues that you talk about. Our experience is, and I think the research is, that crimes like burglary tend to be reported, or rather there's not a significant variation in the level of reporting, partly because of the links to insurance claims and so forth. We track the survey work, victim surveys that are done across the UK, actually, across Britain, but in London as well. So we see whether there's any variations in there that we should pick up that tell us that the situation you describe as a possibility is actually happening. We don't see any evidence of that at the moment. I'm not going to say that that couldn't happen, but we don't see any evidence at the moment, and I don't think the crime figures that we're seeing support that. And the other ways of assessing levels of crime through victim surveys again don't support the contention that we do have an increased under-reporting of crime. And in some areas we know we have had significant increases, we think, in reporting of crime.
It is a fact, though, isn't it, that satisfaction with the police service is in fact declining?
So we know that, yes, satisfaction has been declining for some time. We've had the position is a bit more uncertain at the moment. So again, I'm not going to rest too much on some signs of improvements in victim satisfaction over the last period. But again, that's very, we can't put too much on that because that's not a long enough period to be able to say that anything is significant has changed. But yes, I'm very aware of the challenges around victim satisfaction. We've put in place a number of measures to deal with that. We know some of that was linked with the move towards a greater degree of online and telephone reporting of crime. And we've invested heavily in the training for our staff who are dealing with people on the telephone when they call in to report crime. And we think that is having a beneficial effect. Too early to say for certain, but early signs are that's having a beneficial effect. We've changed some of our processes on some types of crime. So we reviewed the crime assessment policy some months ago and changed the criteria in there to open more discretion around the crimes that should be allocated for further investigation. And we're making changes currently, some of which we've started to put in place around the way we deal in particular with burglary, domestic burglary and
I've clearly
robbery.
given you the opportunity to read your brief.
Oh, sorry, I'm not reading my brief. This is stuff I live and breathe every day. And
Can I move to something specific, which is borough crime priorities? When boroughs select what their crime priorities are, does that actually have any effect on crime levels for those offences in those particular boroughs?
So if you take something like burglary, for example, there's something like 23 boroughs from memory, so from memory, have burglary as a local priority within their borough. We know we have different, very, very widely ranging actual differences at the moment in terms of the experience around burglary in different parts of London. So clearly in some places that is having an impact, in other places the challenge is greater. Whether that's linked with whether it's a priority or not is quite a difficult connection to make. Where the focus we have on violence means that the capacity to put a lot of resource into the local priorities is clearly limited by the focus on violence, notwithstanding that a significant number of boroughs, and I'm afraid I can't remember the number overall, but it's the majority, have some aspects of violence as local priorities as well as they are priorities for us right across London. Mm-hmm. So separating out what is because it's a local priority and what is because it's a priority for the Met and for London as a whole is a tricky thing to do in terms of causal links. What we do think is that where it is a local priority, we're partners and sign up, and where we work with groups in the community on those priorities, we know the activity that goes on, and we think that is beneficial and clearly links with what people in that particular part of London say they want us to focus on.
Yes. When I actually have the priorities in front of me. For my own patch, which has an inner London borough and 3 outer London boroughs in it, all of them have burglary as their priority. And the difference between the one inner London borough and the 3 outer London boroughs in my patch, which is southwest, is very striking. And it has been suggested that maybe, and I haven't mentioned the specific point, which is that the one inner London borough, the effect of the burglary priority has been a very substantial improvement compared to what has been happening in the outer London boroughs, is a suggestion that resources may be being pulled out of the outer London, the 3 outer London boroughs, to help the inner London borough. How would I challenge that?
Well, I think I'll treat that as a rhetorical question, but
no, I do want to know how
your challenge. I mean, so of course. So if I take the 4 boroughs in the southwest BCU,
yes.
And I know not quite coterminous, I think, with yours, but if you look, so Wandsworth is an inner London borough,
yes,
with a 6% rise in burglary. Richmond is, we would say, an outer London borough with a 14% decrease in burglary. Kingston has about a 9% increase in burglary.
Mr. Simmons. I'm looking at the list of priorities, and I'm looking at a quarterly figure. It is true that there has been a very recent improvement, but if I look at the first quarter, January, March 2018-19, compared with the quarter January to March 2017 and 18, there was a move completely the other way. So, for example, according to the figures that I have provided to me, in Wandsworth, I'm of course not dissing in any way the very recent improvement, which I think there's been a kind of very substantial shock at the very large increase in the amount of burglaries there had been in the quarters that I'm making a comparison for. But I do want to know how I can say, contrary to the popular belief that the outer London boroughs are being robbed to flatter the figures for the inner London borough.
So, firstly, I think, so the figures I was quoting were over 12 months, and it's important, bear in mind we do have spikes of particular crimes depending on, groups of offenders, series that happen. So we need, as you'd expect, I look both at short-term and longer-term figures myself as well. But part of the benefit of the model we have operating across more than one borough is when an individual borough has a spike in burglary, there is more flexibility. For example, there is more flexibility to use the resource to target that and then move to where that, to the other locations where the problem presents itself. So if I take the boroughs that I mentioned just now as examples, the crime squad that would be used to proactively target burglars in Kingston prior to the mergers was 4 officers. 4 officers to target a team of burglars, potentially any other problem that was arising. That was that because that was a very small borough in staff numbers. What they now have is a much more substantial proactive capability, not as large as we'd like, that is able to target different problems in different parts of the borough. So, for example, a borough like Kingston, we put significant effort in over months, culminating in a series of raids that were done a few weeks ago into targeting drug lines that were driving both violent and acquisitive crime in a borough like Kingston, which in other circumstances would not have been able to attract the kind of resource to do that as an individual borough on its own. So, and that doesn't mean either that we're ignoring the inner boroughs and the boroughs that have that very high level of intensity of crime and demand at the expense of outer boroughs either. But what it does mean is that our model allows us to be more flexible in using the right resource to tackle different types of crime wherever they emerge in London. We know last year during the Pathfinder we had a very significant spike in burglary in the 2 outer London boroughs in East London. And we were able to, some might say, and I would have liked us to have been quicker to have done it, but we were able to flex the resource we needed to tackle that into place where you see that those boroughs now have, on the outskirts of East London, some of the highest levels of burglary reduction in London at the moment. Some of that for obvious reasons. when we look at the quarterly figures, we do see fluctuations. So there are 2 boroughs in London none of the ones you've mentioned, in fact, that have over the last quarter have got very significant challenges in burglary specific to that quarter, and we are tasking against that and tackling that. So the short-term figures, yes, we are flexible in terms of tackling short-term crime trends. We also need to look at what the longer-term impact of the work we do is over time with those spikes that happen within that.
Well, I think you have given me an explanation I can use about the directing the resources to it. And of course, I have to say that the Borough Commander, Chief Superintendent Benneter, is well aware of this belief that the locals have. After all, we're all taxpayers, and it does not terribly good. The next thing I'd like to ask you about, please, is the effect of the increased level of stop and search, what effect that has had on the decrease in violent crime.
So it's our judgment is that whether the increased level of stop and search has been a significant factor in suppressing violent crime across London, where it's being used in that targeted way that we described, based on the intelligence, based on the patterns of crime, and by officers who we are confident are well trained and skilled in the use of the tactic. Drawing an exact causal link between any tactic and the results is always difficult, and there comes a point where you have to make judgment, but it is part of our judgment that has been a really significant part of the reduction in the number of young people, who've been stabbed. People of all ages have been stabbed, actually, but particularly in young people. And from that into the, notwithstanding the tragedies of recent weeks, on the overall homicide figures for the last 12 months.
Yes. We have been provided with very interesting statistics which begin in April 2008 of stop and searches going up to the current level. Am I not right in thinking that it was in 2007 that the old sus laws went, when there was... I'm asking you because you will remember.
I am one of the few people probably in the Met at the moment who can remember the sus laws, only for a very early part of my career. No, but the main... it was the Police and Criminal Evidence Act that effectively did away with the sus laws, which was passed in 1984, of course, and fully implemented in 1986, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. So a bit more recent than that. I'm tempted to talk about the Metropolitan Police Act of 1839, which was the legislation I had to learn for sus as it was coming out.
The gravamen of my question was going to be that in those days, when there weren't rules and regulations and so on, was, as far as you're concerned, in your memory of this, do you think that the fact that there were no such regulations as we have nowadays relating to stop and search, was the level of crime, particularly knife crime, lower?
So the patterns of crime now compared to 1982, which is my first experience of policing, are so significantly different, drawing comparisons is difficult. What I'm really clear on, and I can, if you indulge me just for a moment, what I'm really clear on, having joined just after the 1981 Brixton disorders, and having seen some of the disorders that carried on through the 80s and some of the things that the relationships between police and communities behind that, what I am really clear on with the perspective of 38 years in policing London is how different our approach to the use of stop and search is now. And I would say that we are much more targeted, much more considered, much more effective in our use of the tactic now than we have ever been. Frankly, I do take considerable pride in the changes over that period of time, and particularly in the work that people are doing at the moment.
So you wouldn't subscribe to the view that we, if you like, should have a permanent Section 60 in London?
No, Section 60. There's a lot of significance attached to Section 60, and it is a very important tool for us. But of course, Section 60 accounts for quite a low proportion of the overall stop and search activity that's undertaken. members will know, of course, why Section 60 is important, because of how it allows us to use powers over a limited period with the right authority, where there is specific intelligence around what may occur, or there has been a specific incident that we need to respond to. But no, I don't adhere to that view. But Section 60 is a really important tool for us, and we do encourage our officers to use Section 60, to authorise Section 60 at the right level, where that is the appropriate response to either anticipated or incidents of violence or incidents that have happened. It's having that balance.
Thank you, Chairman.
And you want to comment?
Yes, this is a question for the Deputy Mayor, please. Would you say that London is less safe now than it was 3 years ago?
I think that there's a significant problem about violence in the streets of London and nationally. You've heard the statistics over the last year. Absolutely not complacent, because we've had such a terrible month and such some terrible murders. We are beginning to see the early signs of violence decreasing in London, and that is a result, if you've already asked about, result of really significant police enforcement, but also significant partnership working to really try to prevent those young people who are likely to pick up a knife and likely to cause violence, to support them and prevent them from doing so.
Yeah, yes, I agree with all of that. But the actual question, would you think that London is less safe now than it was 3 years ago?
We have seen crime rising and violence rising since 2014.
So do you think it's less safe now than it was 3 years ago?
And it's been rising in London, and it is rising more significantly outside London as well.
No, let's
in
just
the last
concentrate.
year, we've seen violence begin to really very, very early stages, not complacent. We don't know if it's a trend. We're beginning to see it come down.
To go back to the question that I keep trying to ask you, would you say that London was safer now or less safe than it was 3 years ago?
And my answer to that is that the violence began to rise in 2014, and if you look at the graphs, you can see that very clearly rising in 2014 in London, and it's been rising nationally as well.
Because the Mayor, of course, thinks it's safer now than it was 3 years ago.
As I've said, violence began to rise in 2014, and you could see that happening. If you look at all the graphs, you can see that happening, rising in London and outside London as well.
Deputy Mayor will stop, because you're not going to give a yes-no answer to that. The Mayor did. He thinks we're safer, which is extraordinary, as we know. If I can just ask you a quick question about the VRU. The VRU is supposed to be having 2 reports coming to or being produced in July. The homicide and serious case review is one, and a strategic needs assessment to explore the underlying causes of violence. Do you have sight of either of those reports?
Both those reports are being commissioned and are being worked on at the moment. I'm not completely sure whether they'll be published this side of the summer, but they are being worked on and are in progress. Because
they were supposed to be ready in July. So can we certainly have copies of them when they are out?
Oh, absolutely. They will be published on the website, and we'll send them to you when they are produced. The work has been, was quickly procured, undertaken. It's not been undertaken by the Violence Reduction Unit. That has been put out. I think the serious homicide one has been undertaken by a consortium with Bedfordshire University. But of course, those will be public documents.
Okay, if you can try and chivvy them along, because so often these documents go on and on and on, and then we find various documents are produced after we want to talk about them. But thank you anyway, Chairman. Thank you.
Before we move to the next set of questions, Assistant Commissioner, can I ask you about something that the Commissioner said in a keynote speech at the Police Foundation's John Harris Memorial Lecture last week? So she said the police would need more resources, better technology, and greater skills to tackle rises in crime and improve sanction detection rate. Are you worried about the future? What does she mean by greater skills in particular? And what will the Met look like, say, 5 years from now, if you do not get that investment in technology training and money for more police officers?
So there are different aspects to the range of issues that the Commissioner's talked about and that you've referred to there, Chair. So there's the technical investment that we need. We talked a bit earlier on about digital investigations. They come into not just the most serious crimes we were talking about before, but they come into virtually every crime now. So even relatively low-level drug dealing, for example, the connections, the evidence through phones is a critical part of the evidence, and so the demand goes right through all levels of crime. So there is definitely the technical challenge, which we've talked about already. In the skills challenge, as members will absolutely be aware, we've significantly changed the structure of how we investigate the overwhelming volume of crime in London. Our intention is absolutely there that it should be part of the role of every police officer in London to be able to investigate certain types of crime to their conclusion. That's a big change for an organisation where we tended to, in a different environment, to be able to have lots of squads to do different things. We are still investing heavily in building the skills of those officers. We have a programme through this coming year, well, it's less than a year now, through this current financial year to do so, with a training investment of people like detective sergeants to work alongside uniform officers to help them develop their skills. So at the moment, the changes that we have made to how we deal with crime, those are still undoubtedly bedding in. And I do think we will be in 12 months' time, for example, that we will be in a very different place around the skills and capabilities of officers investigating crime right across London. And at the same time, you'll know that we have a lot of work to try and increase the recruitment of detectives and to make sure detectives are focused on the crimes that use the particular skills that go with that role and the training that goes with that role, and we have the numbers able to deal with the crimes such as the very serious crimes we were talking about earlier on. So there's lots of work we're doing in that to move along on those fronts. What, of course, we can't get away from equally, though, is that some aspects of crime are becoming still increasing in terms of the demand for officers, and that the complexity, whether digital or in other aspects of investigation, still continues. So, for example, in the challenges around disclosure, which is clearly linked with some of the technology, but it's a broad challenge for us, are well rehearsed. So the challenge is a significant one. It's not one where I can say with confidence, in 12 months' time, this will be the position we're in, because we talk, for example, about burglary and robbery and some of the upward pressures that are being seen nationally around some of those crimes. The context is moving continuously. The key point, I think, or one of the key points from what the Commissioner said, is the importance of, amongst all the things I've talked about in terms of building the skills and capability of officers generally, is the role technology can potentially play in that. And we've touched earlier on in members' questions on some of the areas where that's significant at the moment.
Thank you for that. Moving on, next set of questions, women in the criminal justice system. Shalom.
Good morning, Assistant Commissioner, Deputy Mayor. Just wanted to focus on a report that we released last year, Long Way From Home, looking at women in criminal justice system. And one of the recommendations we put forward in that report was around how the Mayor could use his power and influence to improve the response throughout the criminal justice system for women. Just wanted to know if there'd been any update from MOPAC and the Mayor over the last 12 months on the back of that report.
Yeah, and thank you very much for the Assembly and the committee for that really good report in terms of women in the criminal justice system. I genuinely think that London is leading the way in this. We can really, I'm very happy to give you a sort of table of progress against your recommendations. Really happy to give that to you. I won't read it out now.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Some real highlights. We've been, part of our devolution negotiations with the Ministry of Justice. Female offending is a key part of that, and there's been a lot of progress made with the Ministry of Justice around looking at what a budget might look like, how that is working. We have had a new women's centre open up in Islington because of the co-commissioning fund. I'm sure you'll remember we top sliced the money off the London Crime Prevention Fund. Part of that meant that we could open a new women's centre in Islington, being run by Advance Minerva. That is now open. The Mayor...
So sorry, just on that, because I was going to ask you about that women's centre. So you're saying that centre is now open?
There is a centre open in Islington, funded by the co-commissioning fund. Yes.
Yeah, we knew that was being co-funded.
Yeah,
if we could get details of that, because I think that would be something that we'd probably be keen to look at. Thank you.
Yeah. The Mayor has invested, I think we're probably the majority commissioner for female offending services in London. We're certainly, I think, outstripping the Ministry of Justice. We have enhanced community provision across 21 boroughs now. As I said, there's a women's centre open. We've had really good discussions around a whole system approach to female offending. And there is, very shortly, I hope that we will all, partners and ourselves, formally sign up for a blueprint for London on female offending. Really good work that we've done with the Prison Reform Trust. We've had indications through the London Crime Reduction Board that all partners will be signing up to this. And that's a blueprint of a whole system, holistic approach to female offending in London. I think that's the first of its kind in the country, a massive step forward as well, and that's a massive strategic step forward, and that's been matched by investment and services as well.
So that sounds like there's good, steady progress, and like you said, you will send us some more comprehensive update of what's been going on. It seems like things are going in the right way. One of the things that we also looked at was the fact that how do we stop women actually going through the criminal justice system in the first instance. We appreciate that the Mayor, that's not, that the issue around sentencing lies with the MOJ, that's not something the Mayor controls, but there was going to be a pilot to help divert women away from the criminal justice system. Has that started, and is there any progress you could update us on?
That part, you're right, and I think it's one of your recommendations, wasn't it? It's that female offender diversion pilot is starting in August.
Okay.
And will run, I think, till June, is it 2021? It will run, but it will be starting in August.
So it would be great if we could have some more details in terms of specifically maybe which boroughs they'd be operating from and which women's groups they'll be working with, so that'd be quite great. Another issue that comes up all too often is the fact that the issues around out of court disposal orders, and the fact that again this could help in terms of not sending women for some of the smaller, yes they are offences, but some of the smaller offences which may not require a sentence, but the rates for that continue to fall. Assistant Commissioner, do you have any reason for why that's not being used, and actually something that the Met should probably be pursuing a bit more?
So in the latter part of the question is the easy one to answer, is I don't think we fully understand the change in there at the moment. We know there's been a dramatic reduction in the number of women being brought into police custody, for example, so that's down by about 40-something%. So there's been a big overall reduction in the number of women coming into custody. I'm not going to state this as an obvious as a thing, because I don't know it to be the case for certain, but if the presumption is that those tend to be the more serious offences that are still coming in, then that might be one of the things that links with the reduction in the out-of-court disposals. But I do accept that we need to look at that in more detail to understand that better.
So there's something that, because again, one of the things that we touched on was around the triage support, and if that's something that's going to be looked at in a bit more detail, is that your understanding of?
Yes, that is. Yes, that's yeah.
And then the only other area that I wanted to focus on was around, again, just coming back to the issue around community policing, community sentencing. It's something that was included in the police and crime plan. Is there anything that you could update us on that, Deputy Mayor, in terms of how that will be rolled out, and if you're still pushing to try and get more of that across London boroughs?
In terms of community sentencing, part of that discussion that I talked about the devolution, second memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Justice, part of that has been subsumed into that with the redesign of probation services and our discussions around co-commissioning around that. But we have also been in discussions with we've also been in discussion with the Department of Health as well, and the Ministry of Justice around a community sentence treatment requirement, which will be up and running soon, and it's been announced by the Ministry of Justice that will be one of the pilots around the community sentence treatment pilot, which means that as part of the sentencing there will be support for the women available, and that's going to be that is going to be tested out of the Beth Women's Centre in Lambeth.
That's good to hear. One of the things that we specifically did ask, which we didn't get a response from the Mayor around the community policing, is that, in a sense, women would be targeted as a special group in reviewing that community sentencing. Is that something that you probably want to review and maybe look at as part of the review?
Female offenders have been, in our discussions on devolution and with the Ministry of Justice, which have been really positive. Female offending have been a a cohort that has been really focused on. And absolutely, that's part of our, it's not just about community sentences and the probation redesign, but it's, you know, we are focusing on that. And that's why we've managed to make such progress in the other areas that I've talked about, as well as the community sentencing treatment requirement, which was not going to be in London. And we proactively chased the Ministry of Justice to get that into London, because it seemed to be such a good step forward in terms of, one, a community sentence, but two, actually ensuring that female offenders get the support that they need to ensure that they don't reoffend and they aren't going back into custody, into prison, when they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
And I think that's good, because I think definitely looking at more creative community sentencing, not just a blanket, this is community sentencing for all offenders, but something that's specifically targeted at those female offenders. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Mitchell, followed by Assembly Member Arbour, and then Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you, sir. Assistant Commissioner, the report that Assembly Member Ashmomi referred to there about women in the criminal system, one of the things that emerges is that one of the main reasons women are in the system is for evasion of the TV licence fee. And I wondered, I think it might even numerically be the biggest reason. And I wonder what your view on that was. It seems incredible, would you not say, that this is the main reason, that this is utterly archaic, that these women should not even be in the courts for this reason. This thing should be at least a civil offence or something. But the idea that it's a crime surely is taking up, just even on a cynical level, taking up court time. But I mean, these people should not be, could you not strongly recommend or lobby that this is changed?
I'm not sure that's a matter for the police, because we don't investigate or deal with television licence offences. So I suspect that's an issue for a different prosecuting authority.
It's the main reason women are in the criminal justice system.
But not through the police processes.
Well, anyway, that is the main reason that they are actually end up in the court. That's the reason they're in our report, this Assembly's report. So I would have thought you might have a view on that, that's all.
I have views. I suppose I have views on a whole range of things, but I suppose in terms of the police involvement, it's not in that territory. So,
but the mere fact that they end, okay, you might not be involved, but the mere fact they end up there surely has a knock-on effect in terms of procedure and time.
So I think it's important for the criminal justice system to be focused on the issues that are most important for society as a whole.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important the criminal justice system supports.
Is not it really, is it?
Supports desistance from criminal activity and so on, and so. But beyond that, I think it's not really an area for me.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, I just wanted to pick up, Deputy Mayor, in all of the discussions you talk about the devolution agenda with the MOJ, which obviously has been going on for some time. When did you? I may have not heard you say it, but and you may have done. But when are you likely to have this whole package signed?
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, there's a lot going on here, and it would be helpful when it is ready that we could perhaps have a briefing on it.
Really happy to arrange a separate briefing on where, you know, the memorandum of understanding that we've already signed. We've signed a memorandum of understanding, first one, which had some significant devolution. For example, we had the devolution of the witness service, part of the witness service budget. So we have now re-procured an integrated victims and witness service. I think, again, one of the first in the country. Certainly my colleagues from police and crime commissions around the country have been asking me, how did you do that? In terms of the second memorandum of understanding, I went into the Ministry of Justice yesterday and had 2 meetings with both with Edward Argar and with Robert Buckland to talk about devolution. So I'm very keen, they're very keen to get on and sign it. And this is a genuine issue. It will depend on what happens to the next Prime Minister.
Okay.
Will those ministers still be there? Will they be able to take those decisions? If not, that will delay things. It has been going on for some time, and it's, to be fair to officials and in the Ministry of Justice, it's not because they don't want to do this, but actually, and I'm sorry to talk about this here, it's Police and Crime Committee, Brexit has had an impact because
impact on
officials have been
government.
taken off,
Yeah.
you know, so, and it's not being you can sigh, Peter, but it is true.
It has had an impact on
Keep going, come on, let's get it.
It has,
Deputy
okay.
Mayor, get it out your
Sorry.
system, get it out your system, and then we can
Well,
move on,
It's just very
okay?
frustrating because actually
Nothing
the
else is
devolution
happening.
package could, you know, we're on the sort of verge of making quite substantial progress, especially around female offending. Your point, Peter, around debt and women in prison absolutely stands. There are too many women in prison who are there for small offences who would be far better served, and the community and their families would be far better served if they had good community sentences and good rehabilitation services to enable them not to reoffend. This has been delayed and decisions are not being taken because of that.
Okay, thank you.
And that's what you would
Okay, right, we move on. Next section, finances. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. This is to start with for the Deputy Mayor, please. The MOPAC outturn position at the end of March is a net underspend of only 0.4% against the gross budget. So what has been the key, do you think, to this success?
Of the MOPAC budget?
Yes.
Overall with the Metropolitan Police budget, you're talking about separately, sorry.
The outturn position at the end of March, just being... I'm being positive for a change here, Deputy
that's
Mayor. I
slightly
know
taken
it's
aback.
shocked you. I know. Take a deep breath. There's more to come, don't worry. But on this particular subject,
Slightly wary of this question.
how have you done so well with your underspend, as in nearly coming in on budget?
If you are talking about the Met as well as MOPAC, I think
Yep.
there has been, well, I know there has been in terms of over the last couple of years, both within MOPAC and the Metropolitan Police, really significant improvements around financial management, monitoring of decisions, monitoring of spend. There has been real significant grip and improvement on that. It's not to say that it doesn't need to get better, but there has been significant improvement both within the Metropolitan Police and within MOPAC in order to be able to get to the point where there are still underspends, but in terms of the volume and the size of the budget, I think they have done pretty well to get to that point.
Yes, we're in agreement. Hang on to that. So
Wondering
both of
what's
you, how
next.
likely is the Met to reach its target of 31,000 officers in 2019-20?
I have had discussions with Robin Wilkinson from the Management Board on this last week as part of Investment Advisory, as part of those the meetings that I've already just talked about today. I am told we are on track to get 31,000 police officers by the end of this year, by end of the calendar year. It's certainly something that I know Robin and his team are absolutely focused on. Every sinew has been strained to make sure that they get the applicants in, they train them, they get them through the process, and they are out onto the streets by the end of the year.
Yes, it's a great shame it can't come earlier, because I'm quite frankly sick to death of listening to Mayor Khan screaming that there isn't enough money for officers, when in actual fact the money is in place for those officers. So it's not the government's fault that the Met's incapable of getting new recruits. So why is it taking so long? He announced £5 million to go towards training not this February, the February before, and yet it took until September, October to start putting all that into place.
So as you will know, I'm sure you'll have been briefed by the Met on recruitment processes, and you will also know that in terms of budget setting, you will know that the vast majority of the money comes from the government. We do not get, and the Metropolitan Police do not get certainty around the budgets for financial years. That allocation of funding is not certain until the January, February, when the financial year starts in April. You cannot recruit and train police officers from knowing the money is going to be there in April. They don't just come on, you can't just turn on a tap. It does take, and the time has come down, it takes nearly 9 months to recruit and train an officer. Because the government will not give multi-year funding settlements to the police, not just the Met, across the country are calling out for this, you are going to get fluctuations in recruitment because of the uncertainty of funding. We are pressing the government to give multi-year funding so that police forces, Metropolitan Police in particular, because that's our concern, are able to plan properly ahead in terms of recruitment.
Yes, I hear what you say, But then last year there was money in the budget for 30,750, and you went, I think at one point you got down to 28,000 or slightly more. So last year you didn't have the amount of officers that you'd actually got the money in the budget for.
So police officer numbers have fallen for the first, because of government funding, police officer numbers have fallen, fall below 30,000. They have never gone below to 28,000.
Deputy Mayor, if you actually had the amount of officers that you've got the money for, there wouldn't be such a bad situation. But the truth is, certainly even going back to last year, you didn't have the officers that you had the money for. And that's why you've got such an incredibly large overspend relating to police officer overtime.
There is an underspend, a net underspend of £11 million, which you'll have seen in the accounts on police officer pay. I come back to the fact that the government only give annual settlements to the police forces, not just the Metropolitan Police, but across the country.
Yes, you've said that. And
means that it is very difficult.
I understand
you
that.
Cannot recruit.
No.
You cannot recruit officers at the drop of a hat. It takes time to recruit them, and there will be some variation and fluctuation in recruitment. But in terms of your, will we get to 31,000? My understanding, I am promised that we are on track for that to get to 31,000. What the Metropolitan Police need is multi-year funding so that we do not get fluctuations in police officer numbers in the way that we have seen.
There was not the amount of officers last year, in the last financial year, that you had the money for. So you weren't recruiting properly last year either, or the year before, because it's no good saying that there aren't enough police, and I agree with that. I'd put a lot more. Our budget amendment allowed for an extra 1,400 police on the streets, because we passionately believe there should be more police officers. But I also passionately believe that if you've got the money in the budget for more officers than you actually have, it's disingenuous to then blame the government for not enough money when there is the money in there for officers.
We aren't really going to get much further on this, because the real issue is around proper funding from the government to ensure that the police officer numbers can not just be maintained but can increase. And in order to do that, we need multi-year funding.
Yes, you've said that 3 times now. Deputy Mayor, the simple fact is this.
True.
If you actually put the amount of police officers that you've got the money for, then start moaning about the government. Until such time, don't blame other people for the inadequacies of not getting enough police officers in place.
You are probably the only person that is not going to, in terms of recruitment of police officers, it takes up to 9 months to recruit a police officer.
I know that
if you are only giving your settlements a couple of months in advance, it is very difficult to plan. And if then you also know that there are millions of pounds to come out of the budget, you have to plan. And you have to plan
Deputy Mayor,
robustly, but you have to plan. I'm sorry to use the
Deputy Mayor,
word
you can repeat it as many times as you like. But
And
the fact is, you need to get the people that you've got the money for in place. I'll move on. The Met accounts show that the amount in business rates allocated for the police is 220 million from the business rates this year, which is up from 92.5 million last year. So it's quite a large increase. What does the future business rates funding look like?
That is going to be a matter for the Mayor's budget in terms of setting the, as you'll know, the last budget, the Mayor has taken the decisions to divert business rates into the Metropolitan Police budget.
Yes.
So that will be a matter for the budget going forward when the Mayor sets his next budget.
He's given you no indication as to whether it will be around.
Well, I think we can be pretty safe to presume, as we all know, that policing and keeping London safe is the Mayor's #1 priority. He will do everything he can to ensure that police officer numbers increase and stay at the level they should be. I'm sorry to say this. The government is going to have to.
If you're sorry to say it, then perhaps don't.
Pocket. Well, I mean, the leadership candidates, I think both of them now have said that absolutely that the cuts to policing have gone too far, being promised. The Home Secretary himself, when he was a leadership candidate, was promising extra
spend
police
your
officers.
money properly. If you've got enough money for a certain amount of officers, then make sure you've got the officers. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Or we move on to the last set of questions.
Okay, right.
The toxic trio.
Follow that, if we may, right. And on the last question, so under the inspired new chairmanship, we're moving on really quickly, isn't it? Fantastic. Right, so the context of this, if I may, is the visit by the Health Committee, which I'm honoured to, the Deputy Chair, to the Archway Children's Centre and the work that we're doing there. And it was interesting to go to this fantastic centre and to hear this phrase used a lot. And it's clearly a phrase that's embedded with the education and health community, which is toxic trio. I was a bit surprised because all the work that we've done on the violence reduction unit, and I've been around probably far too long, I'd never heard that term before. So I'm interested to see the read across between education, health, toxic trio across to the sphere of violence, particularly bear in mind we do know very much about the phrase ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. So there's obviously a read across the two. So I'll start off the questions on this subject really to Mark, if I may, is what work has the Met undertaken specifically targeting what is phrased as the toxic trio. And just a reminder for those, the audience, those many people watching, that the trio is domestic violence and abuse, substance misuse, and mental health issues. So that's the three, that's the trio. Mark, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, certainly, thank you. I haven't heard the phrase toxic trio before either. I think it's fair to say that we recognise that on any of the three issues that are part of the toxic trio, there are a whole range of interconnected issues. You could actually broaden it out from those three, probably in terms of interconnected issues. So one of the first things that we have been trying, notwithstanding the challenges around where we are in terms of the new structures, one of the key things we were trying to do by bringing together different parts of the Met that deal with, respond to, support people in domestic abuse and other aspects of need, that we were making that more joined up and more integrated. So the safeguarding setups on the BCUs, there is a mental health hub that sits alongside those to try and coordinate that work better, join up that work better, as well as mental health issues that affect other areas of policing, of which members will know that that's substantial. On substance misuse, again, the Met's drug strategy talks about our work on drugs. A lot of our focus, it is fair to say, is around the drugs as a driver for violence, but that does include where that is violence in the home or in a relationship. So I think it's fair to say we are conscious of the overlap, the link, the kind of interconnectedness of the issues. You referred to the ACE work. We know that that kind of brings into focus where those issues join up, and there is work we are doing on how the understanding of ACE it fits into policing practice and how officers work, and similarly the trauma-informed practice, again, which brings in some of the impacts of those different experiences and the cumulative experiences that people have of different issues that come together in this way. That's all work that's happening at the moment, this development at the moment. Some of these concepts are relatively new for policing, but very important for us as we look forward in terms of our approach.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the trauma-informed approach, again, was something that I wasn't particularly cited on and was learning about. So we understand also that in that context, the Met is planning to visit Merseyside police who are actually further ahead. And I know the Met always likes to go along and find out that someone's doing something better than themselves, which is so rare, of course, Mark. But what's your understanding about that visit and the sort of learnings to come out of that?
Apologies, I don't have the details of that visit, I'm afraid, but I will find that out and obviously can pass that on. Okay. And just as an aside, we are very keen to learn from colleagues across the country and recognise that that policing's a team exercise across the whole of the UK.
Okay, well, before I turn to the Deputy Mayor's comments around this, I think a very good example that the Met is involved in is Operation Encompass, which, and you can tell us more detail about, which my understanding is that, which is a joint agency, which is supporting children and young people, and the object is when a child or young person is exposed to a domestic abuse incident one evening, those that are within this operation area, it allows your officers to report to the school before the start of the next day, so that the school is cited on potential issues. Do you want to put a bit more detail around that, Mark?
So I could put a little bit more detail around it, but I don't know if it to be as much as we wish at this stage. So the Encompass is an important initiative for us. It has been, we've sort of briefed right across all the boroughs, our safeguarding teams, the particular people who are involved in the MASH teams on Encompass. I think it's fair to say it's in different stages of development in different parts of London at the moment. So you know, part of the implementation of it involves the negotiation with local authorities around how we jointly work on the initiative. I think it's fair to say, yes, we think it's a good thing to do, but it is work in progress at the moment. I hope to be able to report further progress over coming months as we continue the work on it.
I mean, have you got any? I mean, do we know, or are you able to tell us today, for example, how many boroughs, how many schools, how many incidents have been reported? Do you have that sort of information?
I haven't got that with me, I'm afraid, but I will find that.
Could you write to us? I think that would be really,
yes, absolutely,
really helpful. And so, Deputy Mayor, again, this issue of the trauma-informed approach. We've heard about Operation Encompass. Do you want to tell us about the Mayor's response to that, particularly for, perhaps the commissioning process and your thoughts around what you've heard today around that area?
You've mentioned it yourself, the adverse childhood experiences, and that is very much, as you'll know, part of the strategy with the Violence Reduction Unit, how you tackle adverse childhood experiences in order to be able to really early prevention and intervention to try to ensure that those adverse childhood experiences don't mean that those young people go on to commit violence or become offenders themselves. And that very much is at the heart of the Violence Reduction Unit's work. I mean, one of the papers to the Partnership Reference Group was on adverse childhood experiences. We've heard from the Children's Commissioner on that as well. But in the trauma-informed approach is one that we flagged up in the knife crime strategy as well, that we published in 2017, and our own commissioning does also take that approach in terms of some of the work that we have commissioned. For example, the County Lines work from Response and Rescue, Abianda, the specialist service for young women and girls is very much taking a trauma-informed approach. The work that we do in accident emergency units via Red Thread, as well as Oasis, very much a trauma-informed approach as well. So it's certainly something that's not just on the radar, it is being embedded in the work that we are doing in tackling violence, but also work that we are commissioning as well.
Okay, this is great. So my last point really is that these were new phrases to the Health Committee, or to myself, with the read across. And it'd be worth, I think, yourself going away and talking to your reference group about, there seems to be a whole narrative out there quoting the toxic trio. Is that a complete read across to the work that the VRU is doing, so that, you know, you've got working together, not least using the same phrases and the same working together. There seemed to be a silo, not mentality is the wrong thing, but there seemed to be a separation when we were talking to those good people over in Islington. So I'm just flagging it up, really.
No, I think it's helpful to have it flagged. But I mean, in terms of the toxic trio with mental health, substance abuse and domestic abuse, absolutely a part of the adverse childhood experiences.
Indeed.
And that's why, for example, the scope of the Violence Reduction Unit is what is violence. That sounds strange. It's violence. It's about domestic abuse as well. And we have been really clear from the start that we have to be tackling domestic abuse in order to be able to really do that public, you know, the early prevention work to ensure that children who are much more likely to be involved in violence if they've had violence in their home are protected, supported, and we can tackle domestic abuse as well. And of course, we've had lots of discussions here about mental health and mental health services and the importance of mental health in relation to policing, not just demand, but in relation to really understanding what's happening. Mark's already talked about the mental health units that are now in the basic command units, and we have also had discussions around drugs and substance misuse. So it is there, maybe using different phrases and terminology, we may need to look at that, but that is absolutely within the work.
Chair, thank you for me.
Okay, anyone else? No? So can I thank our guests for attending today and for their answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the discussion and the report from MOPAC attached at Appendix 1 to the report?
Noted.
Next item, work program. Can I ask the committee to note the progress on our work program as set out in the report and note the topics for our thematic meetings in July, September, and the first thematic meeting in October 2019, as agreed at the meeting of the GLA Oversight Committee on the 1st of July. Date of next meeting is Wednesday, the 17th of July, 2019 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber City Hall. And finally, I have no other urgent business. So on that note, I conclude this meeting.
Well done.
GLA